All right. Hello, everyone. It's been a long time coming. I am so excited to be here, finally recording this podcast for myself and for you guys to listen. I know that. So the last podcast that I recorded was about my relationship with my mom. And I really had this goal of, okay, I'm going to record a weekly podcast. But of course, life, a lot of, wait, no, where was my hand? That there, this. Trying to find it on the video. I work as an interior designer, so a lot of this got in the way. Let's just say that. And but it allowed me to build up this podcast, which today, again, welcome to my Awaken to Reality podcast. I am Veronica Barney, or Veronica Mejia Barney, depending if you know me in Colombia or in the US. And this podcast is about sharing A Course in Miracles, a practice of this incredible non-dualistic teaching through the eyes of a young person. I started my journey with the Course since I was 14 years old, and I have grown up with the Course basically, and my life has evolved around it. So it has definitely painted the way I see so much of my life. And I'm just super excited to now be recording a lot more content in English, because previously it was only in Spanish. So welcome to the channel. I will be referencing a month ago's podcast with my mom. She's not in it, but it's about the both of us. So if you get a chance to listen to that, I think it will make a lot of the concepts that I'll be talking about a little bit more clear as well. So I'm thrilled because, so the podcast that I wanted to share with you guys is about, ta-da-da, can you read that in Spanish? It's parents and children. So it is and it's not a follow-up to what I talked about last time. This is an episode that I recorded in parts in Spanish while I was recovering from my ankle reconstruction surgery. And it was so helpful to me, not when I recorded it per se, but when I first heard this talk. It's also a book, obviously. It's by Ken Wapnick. And if you have been studying the course for any length of time and are really serious about your study of the course, you have to read Ken Wapnick. Like, if you're not reading or listening to Ken Wapnick, there might be a lot of incredible information that you may be missing out on that will really help clarify your own study of A Course in Miracles. So this talk is about this book. It's a 2-part book, and it's called Parents and Children, Our Most Difficult Classroom. You can get it from the Foundation for Inner Peace in audio version, and then they also have it in these little books, which are like super nice and easy to read. I happen to have the Spanish version, and that's another reason why kind of the podcast took a minute, because I was trying to, get all of this in English so I didn't have to translate it myself. And I tried, and it just did not happen. So I'm like, you know what? I practically know this by heart. So let me just share those stories that are in this book that touched my life so much. So that was just a mouthful to say. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really excited to be sharing this with you. So if you will join me in a moment of silence before we begin our conversation, it would be awesome. Thank you. Thank you truly for joining me, for being willing to look at this parents and children stuff a different way. So one of the greatest reasons why I wanted to share this podcast and talk about the subject is because when I was growing up, my mom, she was gone quite a bit, and you will hear that if you listen to the previous podcast. But basically, it was my grandmother and my grandfather who raised me for a big part of my childhood. And with my grandmother, per se, I had a very, very, very close, intimate relationship. And like, my grandmother was my everything. I ended up moving to the US when I was 10, but I would constantly visit her. And she was just like this beautiful figure of authority that I really looked up to, that I really loved. Like, she was so filled with wisdom and love for me. I was actually her only granddaughter. And when I was about 22, that's like 8 years ago, she always had many, many health issues, and she ended up passing. And I had been with her months earlier when she passed, and it was very difficult for me to see her in that situation. But at the same time, there was a part of me that was like, no, I'm okay with her transition. This is just what happens. I've been studying the course for many years at this point, and it didn't hit me at the time how much grief I really experienced and how I was not able to process it at the time. So when I came to hearing this talk, I had gone through, and this is maybe like 2 years, almost 3 years after my grandmother had passed, I had gone through this phase of absolute guilt, of like crying and remembering her and just feeling so guilty for not having been with her all the way through the end. I kept on replaying this conversation in my mind where she was in Colombia, and I went to see her, and she was doing really bad, and I had come back to the States to be with my husband and work, and she called me, or I called her one day, and she was like, oh, at this point, like, she's not very mentally coherent, but she was like, when are you gonna come back? Like, so-and-so said that you were coming back in a few months. And in that moment, I was just like silent. Like, I could not plan another trip right in that moment. And then when she passed, my mom had called me a few days before, and she was like, look, your grandmother's awake right now. Why don't you call her? Speak to her. She hasn't been like this lucid for a while. And in that moment, I remember that my husband and I were fighting. We were fighting about some stupid money situation. And I missed that opportunity of calling her. And a few days later, we got the news that she had passed. And forwarding a year and a half, 2 years, I was, just remembering those episodes and feeling so excruciatingly guilty of like feeling like I abandoned her, and then stuff with my grandfather also came up because he had also passed and I hadn't been able to be with him and all of this stuff, right? So when I started listening to this talk with Ken, the first few stories that he talks about, and the talk is like people asking him questions, and which is why I'm like telling you, like, you have to listen to it as well as listen to this podcast. But the first few stories is actually about your relationship with your parents, not parents' relationship with their kids, because that's later in the talk or in the book, depending on which one you listen to. And I remember that one of the stories was a woman asking him basically like, what do I do? I have all these guilty memories of my mom asking for help and me being unable to help her, like only visiting her a few times, whatever. And just like the amount of guilt that comes with that. And I was just so relieved because one of the things that he made me realize through listening to the talk is how much the ego wants us to hang on to guilt. And basically his response to this woman is like, of all the things that you could remember with your mom, it was her mom, and in my case with my grandmother, you choose to focus on the bad things that you did, or so-called. But what if it was the best that you possibly could do at the time? And what about all the good experiences? So it's like our ego wants us to reaffirm our guilt. Now, remember, we carry unconsciously this ancestral guilt of thinking that we pulled off the impossible, which was separating from God. And so therefore, through our daily life experiences, we have to continue reaffirming that guilt in some other level. We have to say, oh, I'm guilty in this external situation with so and so, yada, yada, yada. Has nothing to do with the unconscious guilt that I have in my mind, right? So the ego constantly views situations in our life in a way that fosters and reaffirms our guilt. And it was just crazy because in that moment, like I started thinking, oh my God, yes, like my grandmother and I had so many beautiful, 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 beautiful experiences. And I'm just choosing to focus on my guilt. Like, I don't even care that she's gone. I'm making this about me, right? And I started thinking of all these beautiful experiences and realizing how in my attachment to my guilt, right? The theory of the ego, you're a guilty sinner and you will be punished by God, hide, right? So therefore I have to flee my mind and go find all these external situations which tell me, yes, you're guilty because of something in the world and you need to escape that. Don't ever go back to your mind, right? Because then you could possibly change your mind. I realized that in my adherence, in my upholding of my guilt, I was completely defending myself from the love that my grandfather and my grandmother and my grandfather were continuously offering to me right now. And that I was basically putting a veil between the communication that I could have with them now through my holding on to guilt. And it was just like, oh my God. And that led me to such a profound release of myself and also understanding of the younger self that Veronica was. Is like, you know, you did what you could do at the time with the maturity that you had for, you know, a 22-year-old person that just lost one of the most influential people in her life. And it's like, let it go because your grandmother is not gone, and like she's not holding. And you know, she was a tough woman, like anyone that met her, like she was a tough cookie, as tough as they come. But what I got from her was always this incomprehensible amount of love, no matter what I did. And so I would be asking myself, like, do you think your grandmother would blame you right now for the so-called things that you didn't do? Or would she actually just be like, hello, like, I love you. Like, I'm still here. I'm still helping you. I'm still giving you advice. I'm still not gone. In fact, I'm going to show you a picture of her. Hold on. This is actually both of my grandparents. Here's Grandma. Her name was Aurora. Like, how do you say that in English? There's some specific natural thing, like La Aurora Boreal is what I'm thinking about, if you know Spanish. But anyway, my grandmother was all of that. She was the most shining, beautiful, giving person I had ever known. And that experience was profound. It was really, really profound, because then that led me to realizing that I was doing the same with other people that had passed, like my grandfather, like my dad, and even in present relationships. Like, we hold on to the bad. We look to the bad because on some level that takes us away from the real problem, which is saying yes to God again. So it's like we use all of those situations to trap ourselves, to chain ourselves, to keep ourselves separated from God. And not only did that, in fact, lead me, that release, that realization of what is the ego doing in my mind with the situation, that allowed me to feel so much closer to my grandmother, but also to God, because when you can experience your guiltlessness, your innocence, you're right there with God. And that has nothing to do with your body. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful experience. So, I really hope that brings you some kind of relief, because I know so many of us carry guilt with our parents, our grandparents, figures of authority that we may not be our biological parents, but they are to us, right? I think another thing that happened too is that I was able to see how distorted my perception was of the actual events that led up to my grandmother's death. So in my mind, I was like, I didn't see her for months before she passed and this and that. And then one day I was talking to my mom, this is years later, and she's like, no, you were there like 2 months before she passed. Like, you had literally just been there. And I was like, oh my God, how convenient is it for my story of reaffirming my guilt to think that that's actually how it happened? And yeah, there was a similar story with both of my grandparents, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's also useful for people, is that, so my grandparents were together for almost like 60 plus years. And right at the end of my grandfather's life, he decided to leave my grandmother, sorry. They had an argument about my uncle, who he had problems with drugs all throughout his life. He had schizophrenia, all of that stuff. And he was not my grandfather's biological son. So there came the point where my grandfather no longer wanted my grandmother to bring my uncle back into the house. And he wrote an email to me because we were very close. And he's like, look, this is the situation, blah, blah, blah. And I told him, like, look, Grandpa, like, if you don't want to put up with that, you don't have to. You don't have to put up with that situation if you don't want to. And soon after that, I don't know if it was because of my email, it was part of his own life lesson decisions that he made, but he decided to leave after being together for the whole entire life. And shortly after that, he passed. We went, through the whole funeral thing, blah, blah, blah. What I experienced then with my grandfather, it's like a whole other podcast. But the biggest thing from that experience is that I left thinking, wow, like the example that I got from that was basically pride winning over, because they never spoke after that. Like, he would send her money so she could continue to pay her bills and all of that stuff, make sure she had food, but they never spoke. And they had loved each other so long and so much. And for me, it was just like, oh my God, like that's crazy. And this was actually like helpful and unhelpful in two ways. So in my own relationship, I know that there are a lot of moments of pride, especially in the past, that I dealt with conflict with Luis. And whenever I would get so prideful that I didn't want to talk to him, like I would think of the situation with my grandmother and I would be like, there's no way that I want pride to have the same role that it had in their relationship between both of my grandparents. And so I would always think back on that experience and just, tell myself, okay, there's got to be another way in which we can deal with this, blah, blah, blah. And also just feeling the strength of that pride and how I grew up seeing that, right, in her over and over again and in him as well. And I chose to take that on and adopt that trait, right? And so that actually helped me a lot, like just thinking, wow, I really don't want to be that way. And the funny thing is that, this story had a huge impact of just seeing, like, the power that the ego has to separate love and to basically like say, oh, it never existed. And there's just pride now, just anger. I remember like my grandmother going up to the coffin and just leaving quickly, because she was not very well accepted amongst my grandfather's family. And we never talked about it. Like I never asked her, and now I wish I had. But yeah, we never spoke more in depth about, okay, like what happened, during your last months with grandpa. And recently I was talking to my mom again, she saves me out of so many misconceptions in my head. She said, no, grandma and grandpa actually, they were together. Like when your grandfather got sick, he ended up going to the hospital because he had some kind of, I don't know if it was like an aneurysm or he had a convulsion. He had brain stuff. She came to the hospital. So they did see each other before he passed. And oh my God, that was like, hearing that was like the biggest release ever, because I had held on to the story that they had never talked. They had been together for 60 years and they never talked. Like what? And it was just like, oh my God, like that. Again, so much gratitude. Like, wow, they actually had the opportunity to make amends, even if they didn't say it verbally because of his condition or whatever. I'm sure there was the greatest exchange of love in that moment. And my grandmother, she was very frail at that point, and she did everything she could to get to the hospital and at odd hours of the night. And so that was beautiful to me, just to see, no, love does win, despite everything, love does win. And yeah, that's some of the most incredible experiences that have, shaped how I want to have my relationship with my husband and the things that I know that I need to work on. So yeah, so powerful. Again, highly recommend that you get these books. The foundation for A Course in Miracles, which continues to protect and publish Ken's work. They're doing such an amazing job at continuing to share everything that he left. many of you know that Ken, he wrote 33 books in 30 years about A Course in Miracles. And my best friend and I joke that, yeah, we have material until we die to study from him. And hopefully, we'll be enlightened by the time we finish it. Okay, moving on. And this was an experience that, again, really, really touched me because my mom was some kind of involved in this with someone else. And basically the story goes, so Ken talks about Lawrence, which is an author from, I believe, like the 50s. And there's a story this is like a generational family story that's in this book. And it talks about a marriage that two people had together. And the marriage was, not going well. And he uses the symbolism of a marriage being like an ark of safety. And when that ark is it ark or arch? I think it's arch of safety. Well, sorry, guys. That's when my Colombian kicks in. Let's call it arch of safety. No, arc. Okay. Either way, it's this column looking like thing of safety for a child. And when you make a child be what holds that arc strong, instead of the couple that's in the relationship, it's an incredible unfair weight to put on a child. And it's to no surprise. The reason why I'm bringing up the story is because, at least especially like in the Latin culture, it's so common. Not so much now, but before, it's like, oh, you want to keep your man, well, go get pregnant and have a baby so you can tie him down. And obviously that does not work. And I think, a lot of this is like a call to responsibility, because like I know for a fact, and not necessarily in this same representation of it, of things that my mom put on me. And, now I see that as part of my life's path. But if I were to have a child, is something that I would really keep in mind of not doing. And this is one of those things. It's like the relationship that you have with your partner is such a sacred thing, and that it is for you to maintain, not to put that weight on a child. And basically the way he puts it is very poetically, is like the child was made to uphold the broken ark. And when you see it explained that way, it's like, oh my God, like a child obviously has no power to do that. It's just a child. It's an infant. It's a baby. And to put that kind of responsibility is, number one, very harmful to the child. And number two, it's not good at all for the couple, because then it's like you're not working on the issues that you should be working on. And now you're using something external to be a crutch, and it's not good for either party. Like a child thrives so much better when either things are explained to them clearly of, hey, like mommy and daddy no longer want to be with each other, like we still respect each other wholeheartedly and love you, right, but we're just not cohabiting together anymore. Or when the parents let the child be a child and not put on this responsibility of like, oh, you're the reason why we're together and you have to make us happy so that this works, right? Yeah, I can't mention names, and this is a real life story that's kind of still ongoing. But I feel like and this is also another kind of side story within Ken's book, where we don't tell people the truth. And obviously it doesn't mean like blunt out all of your dirty laundry to your kids, but we don't let them grow up by keeping the truth from them. And these are life lessons that we're all going to go through. And if we don't allow our children to see the reality of things, we actually handicap them so much more, because they will have to deal with these issues when they grow up. And they could have learned many lessons pointing towards that in their childhood if we had been honest with them about the issues that, you know, go on in our family, and give them the power to be like, hey, you know, you do have maturity to understand what's happening, you know, and not put in the child in a role where they have to grow up quickly and now be the parent or the spouse in their relationship, but just be children, you know, and feel the love that comes from that arc, that intention of love, whether the couple is together or not. Because another thing that is insane that he talks about, and this is like actually beneficial not only in couples relationships, but also just in regular relationships where we don't agree with other people. And he says, you know, one of the greatest lessons that you can teach your kids is that you can have a difference of opinion with your partner, and that does not mean that you hate. It does not mean that you hate. And he's really cute. He's like, you know, you could tell your child, look, like, mommy likes chocolate ice cream and daddy likes vanilla ice cream, and that's okay. You know, he likes this sport, mommy does not like that sport, you know, but we still love you. And that's all that really matters. So being able to represent that to a child, this idea that difference can exist, but that does not mean that we hate, is such a profound lesson. Because on one level, it does not allow the child to think that they have the power to pit mommy against daddy for whatever reason, but also it shows them how they can be when they grow up. Because, you know, we all know it, there's thousands of differences in the world, and to not let those differences anger you is such an incredible tool to have, and to really understand and embody that from a deep level. Because, you know, regardless of the differences that we may have, what we really want to remember is that we're all still one son of God, that we're all really the same, even if the differences, because most of the time the differences are merely external, but inside we're both all on the same path of remembering who we truly are. And that's, you know, it's such a beautiful lesson. So yeah, I'm highly a proponent of, you know, telling your kids exactly what's happening. For sure. And it really shows them love too, you know, because sometimes, like, we want to present, you know, and I don't have kids. I have two amazing stepkids that I absolutely adore. And I've seen it, you know, through that angle that I've been able to experience in my life, where sometimes we want to pose as like the perfect parent, right? You know, mommy's crying, but oh no, shut the door because I don't want the child to see. But being real about what's happening with your children shows them, you know, who mommy and daddy really are. And that, and it doesn't mean put the weight of your problems on them, but, you know, show them adults also go through things. and that gives them the freedom to go through things in their own lives without having to shove their feelings or avoid experiencing the things that they may feel for certain things that happen throughout their lives. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And for example, my husband and I, his kids have lived in New York since, a few years and after we got together, and we've kind of seen them grow up in a way far away from us. And even then, sometimes there is this, you're a parent, you do things and you expect certain things from your kids. You expect them to behave this way, or you expect them to respond to you in a nice way. You expect them to love you, right? And Ken makes it really clear, it's like, this is such an unfair imposition on a child. Like, a child does not know how to love. And that's a crazy statement. And trust me, like, if you want more explanation on that, read the book. But it just made so much sense to me, because what a child needs is to feel protected, to feel provided for. As long as they perceive that there is a difference between them and you, meaning you have more power over them, they can't love you. You can't love something that you think is different from you. So when that child really has the room to actually love you is when they have grown up and now they're their own person. Now they can see that their parents, their mom, their dad is also a person going through this life just as much as they are. And from that commonality, from that sense of equality, now they have the opportunity to love their parent. But up until then, expecting love from them is kind of like teaching this idea that, okay, if my child does something bad, then I don't love them anymore. Or if they do something good, then I do love them. It's kind of like it's strengthening that dichotomy of love. Whereas if you're able to show them love regardless of what they do, and this doesn't mean that you don't set limits, that you don't put boundaries, that you don't give your child a penalty or a timeout for something that they did, but it's from what place you're doing it from, right? Is it really coming from a hateful place because you gave your child power to take that piece away from you and you got angry? Or can you find a place where that does not happen and still reprimand them in a constructive way for whatever it is that they did, but still love them, And I feel like that's so hard, because our children tug at so many sorts of strings in very specific ways. And it's very easy to fall out of that desire to give them love, right? And so we turn to expecting things from them. And one of the most beautiful things that, both my husband and I have been able to get to is to give our kids, all of the support that they need and not expect anything from them back. Like, it's been a lot of work, but they don't owe us anything, and I recently had this incredible conversation with my stepson who, he's never called me, and he's the kind of boy that, he's chosen his life from a very young age. And I feel like whatever he's learned from me, he's learned from example, because directly I have never been able to get through to him. And he was going through something the other day, and he called me, and this is what, I told him, look, sweetie, I have never been able to get through to you. So I'm going to say whatever I'm going to say, literally because you're calling me. So on some level, you must be hearing something. So this is the only time that I'm going to do it. And let's see how this goes. And it was so great. It was so great because, he's 19. I think Diego's going to be 20. And, he's his own adult. And I just shared, my experience of what I thought was happening and how he could potentially see the situation in a different way. And it was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. So yeah, like I've never wanted to have my own children, but I am deeply blessed, and I see how being in their lives and them being in my life has been like the exact lesson that I have needed in my path. And yeah, I love them kids so much. Okay, so no expectations, having no expectation with your kids. Oh my God, or with your dogs. I'm a dog mom too, so that is definitely something that plays on my level of my daily experiences. Because you feed the dog and you want him or her, I have to do things a certain way, and you can lose your patience. And it's like, no, I want it this way, and I want you to do this because I did that for you. And it's like, no, remember, unconditional love. But no, like in all seriousness, going back to this idea that by doing this, you are reinforcing this idea that they don't have to be a certain way to feel love, because that's what the ego God is. It's the ego God that loves you when you do well, but wants to punish you and put you in hell when you do something bad. And that's exactly the idea that we're trying to eradicate. So when we're able to reflect that to the kids in our own life, to the children in our own life, whether it be nieces, nephews, dogs, whatever, it's such a powerful thing, because that's what we're teaching ourselves back. We're teaching ourselves, yeah, I want to remember that God loves me no matter what. And that in fact, I have never sinned. So it's, such a powerful lesson. All right, let's see. What else do I have here? Yeah, I think lastly, I'll just add to that arc. I'm gonna have to look this up because I'm still like at a loss where I'm saying this correctly or not. So forgive me, guys. This idea. So an arc is not necessarily held by two people. An arc can also be just one person, and showing. Let's say you're divorced, right? My husband is divorced, and and I've seen this with him multiple times where I have been able to witness, the joining of them two, him and his ex-wife, and still hold that arc together for their kids, right? It's like, if you want to show that love to your kid, you show it by showing that you still have respect and love for the parent. Your other partner, his mom, his dad, hers, whatever. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do, because nowadays, you split from a relationship and you hate each other. And obviously the child is there kind of receiving all of that and seeing it, even if you're not explicitly telling them anything, that energy is felt, like that intention, that space in which you are in your mind in relation to that other spouse that you're not with anymore, that is felt. And you act from it, and kids receive that, even if it's without words. So, imagine and obviously it's not easy. Like I said, I've seen it with my own husband. It has not been easy for him to have a good relationship with his ex-wife. They have both really worked hard at it, and I'm very proud of both of them for having done so. But I have seen the beautiful impacts that when that has worked, right, that it's had on both of the kids. because it's again a saying, we're still holding this arc for you guys, even though we are no longer together. We don't cohabit together. We don't have a relationship anymore, but we're still your parents and we're still here for you. And I find that so beautiful. So beautiful, because it's like you can still provide a child its home, her home and security by basically respecting, and still maybe it's not physically giving love to the ex-spouse, but holding, that space for them, where it's like you're not pitting your child against your ex and they're not doing the same towards you. It's an entirely different way of parenting and of example. So yeah, wanted to close that topic on kids with that. And lastly, as we are coming to the end of this podcast, I'm going to talk about a topic that touches me and will touch me a lot more into the future. And it's this idea of, okay, how do we deal with our parents when they become our kids, basically, when they commence to age and potentially become, not so coherent, or they experience a illness or some kind of sickness that really takes away from their bodies, and just the general mental experience of, we grow up until one point and then we start becoming children again, and now us as the previous children now have to step as parents. And this is kind of a plug for you to listen to the talk, because when he talks about it is so powerful, because there can be so much rage and so much anger in that, especially if in the past we have had a not good relationship with our parents, because now it's like we have two choices: or we receive and take on this responsibility from, to put it very simply, a good place in ourselves, or we bring on all of that ego guilt, all of that resentment that we may have with our parents, and basically fight, because why do I not now have to take care of you in this way when you were not able to take care of me? And I say it because if I go into my ego, I could very much say that at times with my mom, right? And it's like, oh my God, like, how do I want to deal with that, when the time comes? And for example, I have a cousin that's like dear to my heart, where her mom she's never been really completely mentally capable or normal to take care of her. And so she experiences this impotence of, I know that at some point I'm going to have to take care of my mom, and it absolutely sucks because basically she never took care of me, and it's a tough place to be in. And Ken talks about this in a very deep way, where it's almost like one of the toughest spiritual lessons that we go through, and is how do we take care of this aging parent from a place of love. And it's almost like we're really pushed to do our forgiveness work in a very deep way, because it's like, if our parents didn't take care of us, that also leads to us thinking, well, God doesn't care about me and God is just unfair, and obviously we know that that's not the case, but in my particular life and someone else's particular life, it could really represent itself that way. So, can I look at that and ask for help and, allow myself to release my parent from the role of parent, to thank them for whatever it is that they did teach me, because, no matter how terrible, not present a parent is, we've learned something from them that can have a positive impact in our lives. And can I see that regardless of how practically impossible it may feel to me? And, how can I go through this lesson in my life in a way that frees me and frees my parent? So it's a deep one. It's a very, very deep one. And if you have or are going through something like this in your life right now, I just invite you to give this over to the Holy Spirit, for you to see what it is that you need to see, for you to be open to look at the situation differently, to be able to do it differently without any preconceptions, how to truly be helpful, how to do it without a sense of sacrifice. But maybe think that in that there is actually a huge gift for you. Thank you guys. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope this has been helpful on some level. Again, highly, highly recommend you guys checking out those books. You can find them at FACIM.org, which is Foundation for a Course in Miracles.org, which is Ken's foundation. And if you want to listen to them in Spanish, I know that they are on YouTube in Spanish. We will be having our next incredible video podcast I'm not sure when. I'm not going to say a time when, but I do hope to do it within a month or so. And this time it will be about listening to the Holy Spirit. How to listen to the Holy Spirit, how to listen to your inner wisdom, things that you can do to become more attuned to it, and how it can help you transform your life, your inner life always. And obviously that will have external repercussions, but how can you act in your daily life from a place of peace, from a place of guidance, from a place of trust? So stay tuned to that. You can follow my page on Instagram, which is choice.is.power. Choice is power. And again, the channel here on YouTube, Please feel free to share this podcast with other people that you think may benefit from this message. And again, if you want to continue exploring, learning more about A Course in Miracles, and you like how I share things, please consider following the channel. And that is it. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Huge hug, and see you again soon. Bye.